Welcome back to the Political Chick, and welcome back to another Monday evening where we always talk to a book author. At least we always aim to talk to a book author. This one, of particular interest, Thomas Woods talking about nullification. The book title, How to Resist the Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. Are we under federal tyranny, first of all? And has the government gone so far that they've actually made rules that are unconstitutional? I pretty much am on the side of, yep, you know what, that healthcare plan, totally unconstitutional. I can't wait to see it get picked at and overturned, and later on, goodbye. But Thomas Woods is here to tell us about how some states are already enacting plays to get the state power back to them and to their people, and what they're doing to take it away from the federal government that seems to have gone wild with everybody else's money. Thomas, welcome to the Political Chick.
Well, thanks a lot.
Well, thank you for having me. And again, the name of the book is Nullification, How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. Let's get started with, of course, the most fundamental thing here, and that what is nullification in your definition?
Well, it's Jefferson's idea that's sort of making a surprising comeback, and it basically boils down to this. Jefferson was posing the question, what do we do if the federal government goes beyond the bounds of the Constitution? And, this is obviously not exactly just a hypothetical situation here. So what do we do in that case? And he immediately ruled out, I think, solutions that tend to occur to us today, like refer it to the courts, and the courts will settle it. Well, Jefferson's view was the federal courts are part of the problem. I mean, if you're having a dispute with the federal government, you can't expect another branch of the federal government to be an impartial arbiter. But secondly, also he thought the federal courts are just going to rubber stamp everything, which indeed they have. Secondly, elections. Well, elections don't always yield you the wisest people in the world. And even if you do vote for somebody who says the right things, then he gets in there and acts like a bozo. So, what can you actually do? And Jefferson's view was that the only way the American political system can last and can function the way it was intended is for the states to act as checks on the federal government. So therefore, the states have to resist. They have to say no. If something is unconstitutional, they have to say, well, in this state, we're not going to enforce it if it's unconstitutional.
And this protected in the Constitution, is that what's under Article 10 of the Constitution, or Amendment 10?
It's in some ways implied by the 10th Amendment, which of course says that the states retain all powers not delegated to the federal government. But we also see it, what really matters is what did people think they were voting for when they voted to ratify the Constitution? And when you look at these special state conventions, like in Virginia, for instance, when they were debating should we approve this Constitution or not, one of the assurances that skeptics of the Constitution were given was that this federal government is only going to have those powers that we've spelled out in this document, and if it attempts to go beyond these powers, well, don't worry, Virginia will be exonerated from that. We're only signing on to the powers expressly given in this document.
So there's an incentive to move to Virginia, yes?
Indeed. And, of course, Virginia is the most important of the early states. So many of our great statesmen come from there. So their ratifying convention takes on additional importance.
All right, let's talk about some examples of states that are actually employing nullification as we speak. Wyoming, I liked how you were talking about House Bill, I believe, 95, the Firearm Freedom Act, and a few others. Can you go over a couple of states that are successfully nullifying their state or the federal government? Yeah,
well, there are initiatives. In fact, I have no connection to it at all, but other than being friendly with it. But a website called 10thamendmentcenter.com has a really great legislative tracking page where you can click on it and actually see a map of the U.S., and it'll show what initiatives are going on where and how successful they're being. But yeah, we've already seen in at least several states initiatives regarding firearms, with the argument being that if the federal government tries to regulate firearms that have never left this state, were manufactured here, they're not part of interstate commerce, then those regulations are null and void in this state, that it's up to the state to decide what the appropriate regulations are. But beyond just the gun issue, there are states that are drafting cap-and-trade nullification legislation, should that be passed.
And who's on board with that?
Pardon me?
And what states are on board with the cap-and-trade nullification?
Oh gosh, if we have a break, I'll go look, because I forgot. Because I'm pretty sure Oklahoma's one, Washington may be one, but I want to double check on that. And that's still so new because the legislation might not even exist. It might not even be passed for all we know. But what's particularly notable, though, what really sort of got the ball rolling on this was 5 years ago, the so-called Real ID Act was passed, which was basically moving toward the idea of a national ID card in the U.S. And a lot of people, conservatives and liberals, thought, well, I'm not sure how I feel about this. So we had about 24 states in 2005 basically saying, well, we're just not going to do this. And the federal government was so stung by this that it just decided, well, this is one battle, it's just not worth fighting, and they just backed off. So it goes to show if there is substantial resistance, well, then the federal government will, in fact, allow the states to govern themselves the way they were supposed to under the Constitution.
I'm really surprised that was proposed in 2005 under the Bush administration, weren't you?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'm not sure what. I mean, I don't think it had the greatest record on civil liberties in the history of the world. Not that Obama has been any better. But at the same time, in fact, it was also during the Bush administration that we started to see really ramping up the medical marijuana issue. And, in fact, the Supreme Court in 2005 ruled against that. They said the states cannot allow medical marijuana. The federal government has every right to go in there and arrest everybody involved. And yet, even though the Supreme Court said that and the Justice Department said that, in California, they just kept on doing it anyway. I mean, they're still doing it, in spite of the fact that they've been told they can't. So, again, it goes to show if people just don't accept the legitimacy of what the federal government is telling them, then, I mean, what are they going to do? Throw everybody in jail? I mean, so ultimately, the federal government has basically backed down on this issue because there was popular resistance at the state level.
All right, let's talk about the Obama administration. You just mentioned about Bush's administration kind of overstepping their boundaries. Obama's administration spending a lot of money. First, it was the excessive bailouts, then the stimulus package, then it was the health care package. It seems like it just is never ending. Is it because of their ideology? They're saying, let's just grow the government because we don't trust the states that they can run themselves. Or is there another motivating factor to grow the government? What is it? Do they really think that the government is actually running the country better than their own states?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think some people genuinely believe that if you're in a downturn, that you just have to crank up the government spending. And I guess we just ignore the example of Japan, where they did that for years and years and years and years and years. With
and now Greece.
Yeah, zero to show for it. In Greece, I mean, all these governments, all these welfare states and everything are completely collapsing everywhere, and yet that's exactly the path that we're being encouraged to move forward. But I think, secondly, the other reason is much more straightforward, is that, frankly, it's a wonderful bonanza, wonderful opportunity that in the name of solving the economic crisis, you can throw money at all your favorite constituencies, but protest that, of course, we're doing this just to help the economy, you understand. That's what this stimulus is for. It's not to help my voters.
Okay, let's talk about the three clauses in the Constitution that people cite the most when they're trying to argue against constitutional rights. What are they, and how do they get so far misinterpreted?
Oh, yeah, the general welfare, the Commerce Clause, and the necessary and proper clause. These are clauses that you learned in social studies class, basically let the federal government do anything they want to. The general welfare clause, the idea that the federal government can legislate on behalf of the general welfare, you will hear people saying, well, that means they can legislate on health, on education, on whatever, because that's for the general welfare. But that is not at all what the framers meant by that. Every tyrant thinks he's helping the general welfare, and no one would have accepted an open-ended invitation, oh, do whatever you think will be for the general welfare. If that's what that clause meant, why did they bother to list the federal government's powers if they just said it can do anything it thinks will help the general welfare? It did not mean that. Necessary and proper, even Alexander Hamilton...
Whoa, wait, let's go back to the general welfare. What are the things that are actually listed under general welfare that they can exercise control over?
Okay, well, general welfare was understood to mean that when the federal government exercises its delegated powers, such as raising armies, imposing tariffs, erecting needful buildings, building post roads, things like that, when it exercises those powers, it has to exercise them with an eye to the general welfare of the country, not to benefit one part at the expense of another. So it doesn't give the federal government additional powers. It just means when it exercises its actual powers, it has to do so with an eye to the welfare of the country as a whole. That's what the clause meant.